The island of Sardinia is located in the Mediterranean Sea, just south of Corsica and west of the Italian peninsula. During the age of the Roman Empire, Sardinia was home to Roman colonies and governed by Roman prefects. But little is known about the history of the island before the Roman occupation. What is known is that an ancient race of megalith builders called the Nuragic civilization once inhabited Sardinia thousands of years ago. The Nuragic civilization is shrouded in mystery and legend. No one knows exactly who they were, but the ruins of their megalithic towers called Nuragi bear witness that they were mighty builders. Nuragi towers were constructed with large, uncut stones in the Cyclopean style without the use of mortar. Some of the towers were relatively small, while others were astonishingly large, rising over 100 feet into the air. There are over 7,000 ruined Nuragi towers still standing in Sardinia today. But archaeologists estimate that at one time there were more than 30,000 of them all over the island.
Everywhere you go in Sardinia, you find the ruins of the Nuragi towers and the stone rubble belonging to other megalithic constructions that once populated the landscape. Having traveled extensively all over the island, I am amazed that so little attention has been given to this place by archaeologists, considering how anomalous it is in regards to the sheer quantity of megaliths that were once present. But even more remarkable than the abundance of megaliths is the abundance of evidence pointing to the unassailable reality that Sardinia was once inhabited by a race of giants.
Originally, there were apparently 30,000 Nuragi all over the island. Now the estimation of the Nuragi is approximately 7,000 to 8,000 around Sardinia. These towers were the expression of the megalithic architecture, which is also called Cyclopean. The legends mention Cyclops who built these megalithic structures around the island. They might have been very impressive and imposing in those times, because when the Nuragi were first built, the single tower could reach even 28-30 meters height. It was like a skyscraper of the prehistory. And Cyclopean because of the legend, as if they were built by cyclops or giants, but also because of the use of massive boulders, of massive stones, which were set in circles with no use of mortar binding. It must have been really hard to lift them, to move these stones, and even today engineers wouldn't know how to build this type of constructions anymore.
My name is Luigi Muscas. I am 53 years old and I live in Poli Albarei. I've been immersed in the ancient history of the giants of Sardinia ever since I was a little boy. It was handed down to me by my relatives. The first skeleton I ever saw, the first mummy I ever saw, was on a rainy day in the countryside of Poli Albarei. I was out grazing my father's sheep in the fields near the ancient ruins, when suddenly it started to rain. I got caught in a violent thunderstorm. I looked for a shelter among the ruins to get out of the rain, and I found a small stone doorway leading into a megalithic tomb buried in a hillside. When I crawled inside of it, I found the body of a dead giant. He was huge, more than 10 feet long. He was mummified and well preserved. His skin was the same color as mine. He had all his teeth. None one of them was missing. I counted them. There were 32. I wasn't even surprised to find him there. It only confirmed what my relatives had always told me. We were the descendants of the giants. He had a huge head. His legs were this thick, and there was still skin covering the whole body, And even the tendons were still there, the tendons connecting to the fingers. I told my friend about it, and we came back together to play with the giant. We used to joke around with his fingers and make them move by pulling on the tendons in his arm. We had fun pretending he was still alive. We played with the giants for a couple of weeks, until they took him away.
This is one of the alleged tombs that giant bodies were discovered in. In fact, this whole side of this hill overlooking the town of Paoli Albare had tombs embedded into it. This particular tomb here is the tomb in which Luigi saw his first giant when he was a boy. Luigi says the head of the giant was here, facing the sun, facing the east, and the feet of the giant went underneath. This used to be a structure with a roof, a sarcophagus, and it's been filled in with dirt. So in other words, what we're standing on now was not the bottom of the tomb by any means. It went much further down, and it was large enough for Luigi and his friend to get down into it when they were children. So it has been purposely filled in with dirt, so you can no longer access whatever's inside of this tomb. We're going to measure this just so that you can see that it also is certainly large enough to fit the body of a giant. Remembering that we're basically measuring the top of what was the roof of this sarcophagus. So it doesn't necessarily give us the accurate measurement. It would have been larger within, but we can show that definitely it was large enough to accommodate the body that Luigi found. From where the head of the giant would have been positioned to this rock face, which is not the bottom of the sarcophagus, but the top of the sarcophagus. Luigi tells us that the feet of this particular giant extended down underneath this stone, which was the roof. We have a measurement of well over 11 feet.
As you can clearly see, this is all that remains. These ruins were left because I stopped the excavators. They wanted to plant trees, like those trees over there. They wanted to destroy everything. The tombs, the pyramid, the other step pyramid over there, and part of the nuraghi. They wanted to destroy all of this, to plant trees and provide work for the youth. But it was just an excuse to cover up this history. So that day I was eating, and I felt compelled to leave my house and rush up here. I didn't know why I was coming, but it happens like that for me. When I feel I have to go, I go. And so I drove here with my car. I was speeding like crazy to get up here. When I got here, I stopped the excavators who were destroying everything. I told them, stop, and they stopped. They were under specific orders from the authorities to get rid of everything, because these are the last ruins of this lost city, of this history, and they wanted to eliminate it so that nothing would be left.
I've seen many times now the attempt by different governments, different organizations to cover up certain artifacts or certain megalithic sites by simply obscuring the view, in most cases by planting trees, either around or in front of the objects that they don't really want people to be looking at. In this case, Luigi can personally testify to the fact that these trees, right around this area where these tombs of the giants are, were purposely planted in rows with the expressed objective to hide what is here from the view of the villages below. Basically, it's a way of saying there's nothing to see here, don't pay attention to this, and certainly no tourists come to this particular spot. Nobody's here, ever. In fact, there's fences all around here that are broken down to keep people out. These also used to be tombs equivalent to the ones we've already filmed. There were at least 2 or 3 here in this row. There were dozens of tombs right in this area, right along this hill. And right in front of these tombs, trees planted in rows, with no other purpose, ostensibly, except to block the view of these tombs. I spent a considerable amount of time on that hillside, overlooking the village of Pauliarbare, inspecting what remained of the megalithic edifices that once stood there before they were intentionally broken to pieces by heavy machinery. One can clearly see that the debris of the demolition was simply scattered over the fields. It is evident that at one time in the distant past, dozens of tombs were constructed in an east-west orientation between 2 pyramidal structures and a nuraghe tower. What I find very intriguing is that the pyramids seem to have been covered in quartz. A layer of crystallized quartz is still plastered on the exterior of many of the megalithic blocks. The presence of such regal monuments indicates that the deceased entombed between them must have been men of renown. We also measured several ruined graves that were configured in a north-south orientation in front of the tombs. They were all over 11 feet long and certainly spacious enough to accommodate the dead bodies of 10-foot-tall giants, consistent with Luigi's descriptions of the mummified corpses that once occupied them. It's very likely, so we're told, that the bodies that were placed in these particular tombs, the giant bodies, the mummified bodies, are in fact still here. We're fairly confident that if we were to bring shovels up here and start digging, we would probably be arrested. And definitely somebody would come and stop us, because we get the feeling that we're under surveillance, or have been under surveillance since we came into this area of Sardinia.
When I told our story, they threatened me. They said they were going to shoot me and my family. We are continuously monitored.
While we were filming around Pauliarbare, one of the town officials pulled up in his car and was watching us from a distance with a look of consternation on his face. He made a cell phone call before driving away. As soon as we got up to the hillside where the tombs are, a helicopter appeared on the horizon and hovered around the area until we left.
So this is one of the 2 different examples of the giant tombs we have in Sardinia. You have 2 different tombs. This one has a huge stele with a little fake door. And then you have the gallery or corridor. The body was inhumate, which means it was buried underneath, and it was buried first. Then the monument, the tomb, was built on top, once the body had already been buried. Apart from the archaeological explanations, we have legends in Sardinia which say that these tombs were used by young boys to stay in contact with the soul of the ancestors, where they used to spend some days and nights meditating alone, totally alone. This is called the incubation rite. Somehow, these children who were passing into childhood, were becoming adult, had to absorb the energy and power of the ancestors, and these are also described as giants or heroes. So we know that in legend there's always some truth. And even if the door looks small, we assume that the body of the person buried inside the tomb was buried first on a ditch, and then the monument was built on top. So it's not that the body was placed inside the tomb after the building was constructed, the other way around.
So the interior of these tombs was not necessarily built to house a body, but most likely the body would have been buried beneath the tomb, and the aperture inside of the tomb was used for young boys during a rite of passage ceremony.
Exactly.
They would crawl into the opening, and then they would sit down in the gallery, to absorb the might, the power of the mighty ones that are buried beneath them.
Yeah, to become braver and to become more stronger and to become adult.
Because those who were buried in these tombs, the entities that were buried in these tombs, were heroes, were mighty ones.
Yeah, they were the bravest.
So this is the tomb of one of the tombs of the giants. There are many of these dispersed all over Sardinia. This is the actual tomb of the model that we were looking at in the museum in Cagliari, in the capital of Sardinia. This tomb, when it was newly constructed, would have looked just like that model depicted. This is the inner chamber where Paula was telling us that the young people would come in to spend the night in order to absorb the power, the valor, the prowess of the mighty one or the hero buried beneath the soil, who very likely, in my opinion, was a giant. We know that the giants were known as the great heroes, even in Greek mythology, even in Roman lore, were the great heroes and the mighty ones. The Bible calls them the Gibborim, the mighty ones, of old, of renown. And those are exactly the kind of entities that were buried here beneath the soil, beneath these graves, these megalithic structures. Some of the largest stones that I've seen incorporated into the megalithic structures in Sardinia have been used in the tombs of the giants. Like the one I'm standing on right now, it's just absolutely massive. These stones would have been very difficult for normal-sized people to maneuver, to move, unless they were using some kind of technology that is lost to us today.
The tombs of the giants provide us with an important clue regarding the origin of the Nuragic culture. Giants were considered to be the sons of the gods, the mighty men, and the heroes of old who had divine blood coursing through their veins. So the worship of the giants and the enshrinement of their dead bodies was a common theme in the ancient world, especially among the Canaanites.
In the mid-1800s, two academics, one a Jesuit scholar named Antonio Bresciani, and the other an Oxford-educated lawyer named John Tyndale, conducted separate investigations into the Nuragic civilization of Sardinia. They studied the Nuragi towers, the tombs of the giants, and the cultural traditions of the Sardinian people. What's intriguing is that both of these men came to the very same conclusion. The Nuragic civilization was most likely founded by the Canaanites, who they believed had migrated to the island either before or during the conquest of Canaan by Joshua and the Israelites. Furthermore, they both surmised that, just as the Hebrews had discovered to their dismay, when the Canaanites landed in Sardinia, there were giants in their ranks.
The Jesuit scholar Antonio Bresciani wrote extensively about the origins of the Sardinian culture and its connection to the Canaanites, who the Greeks called Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were unrivaled stonemasons and seafarers of the ancient world who not only mastered navigation of the Mediterranean, but sailed all over the earth. Bresciani draws many convincing correlations between Phoenician pagan practices and Sardinian cultural traditions. He even describes the Sardinian rite of passage ceremony, in which their children and young people would leap through the flames of large bonfires, simulating the Canaanite practice of passing their children through the fire. In its most gruesome adaptation, babies and small children were literally fed the smoldering statue of the god Molech, who was depicted as a hybrid with the body of a man and a bull's head. The half-man, half-bull motif of Molech appears prominently in the statues and figurines of the Nuragic culture. Even the tombs of the giants are configured in the shape of a bull's head, invoking the strong bulls of Bashan, mentioned in Psalm 22. And Og, the giant king of Bashan, last of the Rephaim in Canaan, whose bedstead was over 13.5 feet long.
There is compelling evidence all over Sardinia indicating that it was once inhabited by a Canaanitish race with Mesopotamian roots. There is even an ancient ziggurat on the island called Monte da Codi, complete with a monolith and sacrificial stone. It is the only ziggurat ever discovered in the Mediterranean and is archetypical to those found throughout the Middle East. The Greek biographer Plutarch recorded that when the Roman general Quintus Sertorius took the town of Tinges, he broke open the tomb of Ancaeus, the venerated Phoenician giant. Plutarch describes the general's reaction to what he discovered inside. But great was his surprise when he beheld a body 60 cubits long. He immediately offered sacrifices and closed up the tomb, which added greatly to the respect and reputation it had before. What makes Plutarch's account even more fascinating is that near the town of Tinges, stone pillars had been erected by the Phoenicians, emblazoned with the inscription, "We are the Canaanites who fled before the face of Joshua the robber, the son of Nun." Known today as the city of Tangier in northern Morocco, Tinges was located on the western point of the Strait of Gibraltar, providing the Phoenicians with undisputed access to the wider Atlantic. A ship sailing precisely due west from the port at Tangier across the Atlantic Ocean would arrive in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Thousands of years ago, when these voyages took place, a system of waterways provided passage from the sea to the Great Lakes, enabling the Phoenicians to penetrate deep into North America. It is a well-known fact that ancient copper mines once existed on the shores of the Great Lakes, especially in northern Michigan. The Michigan copper mines produce the highest quality copper in the world, with a trademark purity of over 99.5%. Michigan copper has been discovered in the Mediterranean, including on the island of Sardinia, among the oxhide ingots extracted from the Nuragic ruins. There is no doubt that the Phoenicians were navigating the Great Lakes. An ancient petroglyph depicting a Phoenician ship was discovered in a place called Copper Harbor in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, along with the oxidized handprint of a very large man. It is no coincidence that many of the mounds in America harboring the bones of giants were concentrated in and around the Great Lakes Basin.
So if the Canaanites, who the Greeks called the Phoenicians, did indeed travel to the early Americas, and there's a great deal of academic research to support that notion, are they the ones that brought these ideas about giants, the worship of giants, the opening of doorways and portals? And were there giants when they came? Did they establish a presence in early America? Were they doing here what the Hebrew Bible says they were doing in the Middle East, where they were raping women, giving birth to hybrids? Is that the reason why the Anasazi at Chaco Canyon had graves with people that had polydactyly, that they were worshiping 6 fingers, 6 toes, double rows of teeth, mutations that were buried here in the US, but they put jewelry around those extra digits. They were worshiping them as somehow being an offspring of the gods.
I believe that Sardinia holds the key to unlock the mystery of the mound builders in America, and may answer the question that vexed John Wesley Powell concerning the origin and migration of the giants. It seems that this ambiguous island in the western Mediterranean was ground zero for the Canaanite Rephaim, and perhaps their primary stronghold against the divine Holocaust mandated from heaven to exterminate their abominable race.
The giants were dreaded hunters and cannibalizers of men, but they were also hunted by the hounds of heaven. When Joshua fought against the Amorite giants, God hurled hailstones down upon them and killed more of the Amorites himself than did Joshua and his army. Since their expulsion from the land of Canaan, the giant races were forced into exile and likely regrouped on the island of Sardinia, and from there migrated across the earth.
Eventually, the giants were either massacred or bred out in the populations into which they were absorbed. Their genetics and culture were preserved most prominently in the Phoenicians, who carried and seeded their genes across the globe, including in North America. The bloodline of the giants has gradually diminished over the centuries throughout the earth, but in Sardinia, it was apparently still manifest into the 20th century.
These skeletons, as I was telling you before, different varieties were unearthed. Some of them had elongated skulls, others had very long chins. I saw one with horns this big, like a cow, and it had 6 fingers. These genes are still around today. Sometimes people are born with them. In fact, there was a boy in our village. They're no longer here, they moved overseas. This boy had 6-toed feet. And this is generational, because his grandfather also had 6-toed feet. These are ancient genes that we Sardinians still carry to this day. Here in this country, the legends of the giants still get passed down. The legend of the lost civilization. But by now the stories are almost forgotten, because many of the elderly in the country have died, and the young people don't really care about our history. So, many of the old people that knew about the giants are dead. Only a few remember the stories, like my mother and Uncle Alfredo.
My name is Alfredo Garau. I am 76 years old. I live here in Pauli Arbarei. I was 17 or 18 years old when I started driving tractors. And while plowing in the fields, we would turn up these bones, me and my older brother. And we would say, "Why are these bones so large? They are not from cows or oxen." And so we would look at them and wonder, who could these bones belong to? We knew they were human. They looked like the bones of men. And so we didn't have the foresight to take any of them home with us. We would just leave them lying there, and there were many. I even found an ancient coin among them, but I don't have it anymore. They took it away from me. Also, I have seen a place in the countryside where someone built a fence for sheep. And there were piles and piles of bones gathered there. You know how they tie bundles of wheat? They put them in piles like that. There were a lot of them. A lot.
My name is Filomena Cadau. I was born in Pauli Arbarei on the 28th of October, 1939. We used to ask my father questions when we were plowing the soil because we would find pieces of femurs or teeth as big as a finger. So we would ask, what are these? Do they belong to animals? And he would say, no, those were big men that used to live in the past. My father used to always say that. The countryside of Pauli Arbarei was full of these skeletons.
In Coquiacas, there was a tomb that was 11.5 feet long. We measured it several times with Luigi. and there was a skeleton inside of it. We measured the tibia and the femur of the skeleton. It was 5.5 feet long, and that one was documented.
As I would walk behind the plow, every once in a while, some pieces of bones would pop up. We were very close to the nuraghe of Senesi. There were many tombs there, and they were arranged in a circle, and they were enormously long. And my father would always explain to me that some time ago, this land was inhabited by the giants.
When I showed my grandfather the mummy, he told me the whole story about them, how they built the nuraghe, how they built the tombs, the sculptures, everything. Because he inherited the stories from his ancestors. This great civilization was, let's say, was pervasive all over the earth, because we find the same things with the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Mayan civilization, the Inca, the Aztec. In all of the civilizations of the world, there are strong links with the civilization of the giants of Sardinia, because they dominated the entire world. And all of the megaliths in China, in Japan, in Asia, all over the earth, it all comes from the same civilization. Ultimately, this civilization, having rebelled against God, who created everything, was punished and destroyed. The official story does not tell the truth. But if anyone wants to dig, they can still unearth this history inside the nuraghe, the pyramids and the temples. The seeds to replant this great civilization are still there.
So we are in Barumini, at the archaeological site of Sunuragi, which is a UNESCO site. It is one of the largest nuraghe complex of the island, and it's been excavated deeply in the 50s. Just before it was excavated and investigated, the site looked like one of the many hills which characterize the scenery and the landscape of this interior of the island, of the region called Marmilla. Underneath the mud, the earth of these hills, there are other archaeological sites. In all likelihood, nuraghe, these megalithic buildings of the island.
All over Sardinia, there are large mounds of earth covered in stone rubble. Beneath many of these mounds, the ruins of undiscovered nuraghe towers or other megalithic edifices from the antediluvian age are hiding in plain sight. The largest of the nuraghe towers in Sardinia were once thought to be nothing more than natural formations of the landscape before they were unearthed. In the midst of the region known in Sardinian legend as the Lost City, which was said to be the capital of a once great seafaring empire ruled by 10 giant kings, an isolated conical hill rises high into the air. The ruins of a medieval fortress crown the summit, but pale in comparison to the enormous stone edifice rivaling the Great Pyramid of Giza, likely hiding beneath it. The skeptics refer to it as a conical hill, but the elders of the local villages call it an ancient pyramid. Could Sardinia have been the epicenter of a once mighty antediluvian empire? It would have undoubtedly required the resources of a great people to build the tens of thousands of megalithic towers that were once present on the island.
When we were young, we used to go to church, and we would tell the priests about what we saw. We would ask them, "What are these huge skeletons? Who are these big people?" And they would tell us not to look at them, because they were devils. I would tell my grandfather, "Grandpa, the priest told me that these are devils." And he would tell me, "He is the devil, not the giants." So whenever we would find these things, they would tell us to leave them alone, because they were devils. In fact, they burned the bones, but they were too large to be completely consumed, so they would gather them in piles, and then big trucks would come and take them away, because we didn't really care. We didn't know where they took them, but when they came with the trucks, they would load them with the bones and haul them away. But we don't know where they went, and since there were thousands and thousands of them, they probably burned them in a foundry or something, because where else could they put them? So they would make these skeletons disappear. And the church was always involved, because they didn't want people talking. They didn't want people talking about it.
Some of these individuals cited a particular excavation conducted in the early 80s beneath the small church of Santa Anastasia in the village of Sardara. One of the men involved in the excavation during its latter years agreed to a brief rendezvous in the streets of Sardara.
Concerning the skeletons of giants, I worked in Santa Anastasia, where there is a neuralgic archaeological site. I personally excavated 2 skeletons that were more than 10 feet tall. We placed them in the churchyard and left them there, because they had to be inspected by the authorities from Cagliari, by Dr. Ugas and other people. I worked there in 1982, 83 and 84. The skeletons were taken to the municipal archive, and now they're gone. They disappeared, and they made me shut my mouth about it. I took Luigi to the church of Santa Anastasia to show him where I found the skeleton. The outline of the skeleton was still visible in the tomb. But they make you shut your mouth about it. They don't let you say anything. I'm not crazy. I've seen these things. I personally handled the bones. The femur was this high. This part was like this high. They were like us, just taller, over 10 feet tall or so, with big heads, big hands, big feet, long femurs. Their hips were bigger. They were proportionally double our size. For example, I'm 5 feet tall. They were 10 feet tall. You understand?
Does the government of Sardinia know that there used to be a race of giants living on this island, in your opinion?
Le autorità in Sardegna lo sanno dell'esistenza di una razza di giganti che vive qui?
Yes, in my opinion, they know. I think they know, and they are covering everything up. When I worked for the municipality of Sardara, I worked there for 1 year, for 6 months, and then for another 6 months the following year. I found skeletons, I found artifacts, bronze statues, discovered the first nails made of bronze. And those were taken too, but I was able to get them back. But the skeletons of the giants are gone. Nobody knows what happened to them. In my opinion, the authorities from Cagliari are behind this. The church is also involved. Something is going on. The Masons are always involved. I think it's the Masons, the Illuminati, whoever they are. The Masons have the cash, so they hide everything. We have to just keep our mouths shut, you understand? So if I talk about it, or he talks about it, or someone else, we are just a few. They think we are crazy.
My name is Giuseppe Pulici. I was born in Sardara. I live in Sardara. And I worked on the excavations of Santa Anastasia in Sardara. I was hired by the municipality of Sardara in 1979, 80 and 81. I was paid by the municipality of Sardara and I used to work there for 3 or 4 months at a time, and I found skeletons of various dimensions. Some of the skeletons were giants. Their skulls were about 3 or 4 times bigger than ours. We measured the fingers on their hands. They were 6 to 8 inches long, and their legs were extremely long compared to ours. We always carried the bones and the artifacts we found into the church and placed them on the large table. We worked in the early morning until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and after we left, someone would come and take everything away. All the bones we found there belonged to humans. We found many of them scattered around, which had decomposed or fallen apart over time. The bones were everywhere. I found a really big skull that was almost totally intact. It just had a small crack on one side, and part of the spinal cord was still attached to it. In fact, my wife was out there with me that day. She helped me carry that big skull into the church. We placed it on the table with the rest of the artifacts. When we came back the next day, it was gone. Besides all of this, I also found some lens tips, some earrings, some pearls, some bronze statues, some bars made of bronze, earrings, and many other things. There were also huge plates and cups similar to what we use for coffee, for example. But they were enormous. They were not like the cups we use today. I mean, they were cups, but they were enormous. On one occasion, we opened a chamber buried in the nuraghe and discovered the skeleton of a giant that was seated at the table with an enormous plate in front of him. There were even some oyster, mussel, and clam shells that he had been eating still left on the plate. We carried the skeleton out of the nuraghe and placed it on the table in the church. And like usual, someone came during the night and took it away. We were finding so many bones and artifacts in that nuraghe that we were running out of space in the church.
I went to the mayor to ask him if we could find another place somewhere else to put all the stuff we were finding there. He told me to mind my own effing business because it was not my problem. Excuse my French, but that's what he said to me.
I'm Agos Vittorio, born on the 8th of January 1924. I live in Dolianova.
Have you ever seen any giants?
I've seen a dead one.
Where?
He was buried in the ground. As we were digging, we found the body of a dead person. And it was very long, incredibly long. It was as long as from where I'm sitting to the TV over there. It was incredibly big.
Was it really so big?
For sure, it was huge. I said to my friend, let's see if it's a woman because it might have rings or jewels.
Did he have any rings or jewels then?
No, nothing at all. But I know that in the past, when I was a boy, some of my employers found golden earrings near the place where I found the skeleton. In that area.
In the same area?
In the same area. That area, it's called Santa Lucia, near Sardinia. The bones were everywhere. I think there are more still buried out there.
I am Saio Virgilio, born on the 2nd of July 1915. I'm still alive, with 100 years on my shoulders. When I was a young man, I worked labor jobs for money. One day, while digging the foundations for a house with my colleague, we found some Roman coins dedicated to Emperor Pius. When we dug deeper, we unearthed a sarcophagus with a large stone lid. The lid was very heavy and difficult to remove, but eventually we managed to lift it off with our picks. When we opened the sarcophagus, we were shocked to find the corpse of a giant. It was dressed in a black garment. Its bones were very long and its head was enormous. It was definitely supernatural, not human. It was incredibly large. We couldn't believe our eyes. I told my other colleagues about it and they started saying, "Uncle Virgilio dug up a corpse. He dug up a giant corpse." They went to tell the priest about it, and the priest came quickly. When he arrived, I was examining the Roman coins with the inscription of Marcus Pius, and the priest said, "I'll take those. Give them to me. I have to take those coins to the regional council in Cagliari." So we asked the priest, what are we supposed to do with the skeleton? And he said, break it into pieces and bury it under the foundation of the house. And that's what we did. We buried it under the foundation. We also found some giants buried near the Albaggiara Nuraghe. We were working for Natale Puscedo in his vineyards near the Nuraghe. There were several other workers with me. We were using plows and spades because we didn't have tractors in those days. The bones of giants were everywhere in that field. We found more than 20 skeletons of giants buried one on top of the other in cross configurations. So then, all of a sudden, the owner of the vineyard comes and tells us, "Guys, we have to stop digging because the government is intervening." Well, I needed the money more than my colleagues, so I continued to work after they left. When the owner returned, he said, "What are you still doing here?" I said, "Well, I need to work, you know." He said, No, stop. I'll pay you for an extra day, but you have to leave because people from the government are coming. The government inspectors arrived while we were still there. They took pictures of the giant skeletons and examined the entire place, even the walls of the Nuraghe. They sealed up a passageway inside of the Nuraghe. I don't know where it led, but they sealed it up, and they took away the bones of the giants.